Hey, I'm Steve. So my 18th birthday should have been a big deal, right? A milestone. But instead of celebrating, I got kicked out, literally. No warning, no discussion. Just, Steve, you're 18 now. Time to be on your own. And that was it. The shock didn't hit until I was hauling my few belongings in a duffel bag with nowhere to go. Couch surfing became my new normal, hopping from one friend's place to another, trying not to overstay my welcome. But friends can only help so much. Before long, I was sleeping in my car, the back seat my makeshift bed. One night, I tried reaching out to my family, thinking maybe they'd come around. I called Dan, but the conversation went south fast. Hey man, can I crash at your place for a bit? Just until I find something stable. The laughter that came through the phone felt like a slap. Come on, Steve, pull yourself together. You're like a homeless bum now. His wife chimed in, her voice dripping with mockery. Yeah, Steve, maybe try not being a loser. Hanging up, I felt the sting of their words. They weren't just indifferent, they were enjoying this. The realization hit hard. I was completely on my own. In the weeks that followed, I bounced from one temporary solution to another. But the harsh reality of homelessness was relentless. Finding a safe place to sleep, dealing with hunger, the constant uncertainty, it wore me down. Yet amidst this chaos, a spark of determination kept me going. I wasn't going to let their disdain define my life. I managed to scrape together enough for a gym membership, my ticket to regular showers, and kept applying for jobs until I landed one in retail. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A start that meant showing up on time, no matter where I'd slept the night before, and saving every penny that didn't go to basic survival. This chapter of my life was brutal, but it was also a testament to what I could endure. Each day was a battle, not just against the elements, but against the creeping despair that came with being discarded by the people who were supposed to support me. Yet here I was, surviving, driven by the need to prove, not just to them, but to myself, that I was worth something, that I could make it on my own. Landing that retail job felt like a breakthrough. It wasn't glamorous or well-paying, but it was a paycheck, a way to claw back some stability. I scrimped and saved, skipped meals when I had to, just to gather enough for a deposit on a condo I'd share with a roommate for a few months. Life started to look like something normal, or at least my version of it. We'd split bills, and I'd finally sleep under a solid roof, cook meals in a real kitchen. It was like a small patch of paradise. But just as I was finding my footing, the world shifted. The pandemic hit, businesses shuttered, and like dominoes, my little setup collapsed. The retail store closed, and soon after, my roommate lost his job too. We couldn't make rent, and before I knew it, I was back to square one. No home, no job, back to living in my truck. This time I rigged up a camper on the back. It was cramped and cold, but it was mine. Thinking maybe family ties meant something after all, I reached out to my family, hoping at least for a place to park and stay safe. I remember calling my mom, my voice tight with a mix of hope and desperation. Mom, can I park my camper at the house? Just for a while, till I figure things out. The pause on the other end was heavy, then her voice came, cool and distant. Steve, we need to be practical here. If you want to park here, you need to pay rent. And not just any rent, market rate. Market rate for parking in their driveway. It was absurd, and yet there was no negotiation, no familial warmth, just cold, hard business. Seriously, I'm struggling here, and that's your answer. That's the way it has to be, Steve. We all have our burdens. I hung up, the sting of rejection sharper because it came wrapped in the pretense of practicality. So I stayed in my truck, parked in the far corners of supermarket parking lots, using public restrooms, and keeping out of sight. Days blurred into nights, and every sunrise was a reminder of my situation, rootless, but not hopeless. At that point, survival wasn't just about finding food or staying warm. It was about maintaining my dignity, about keeping the will to push through. I refused to break, refused to go back to them, hat in hand, only to be turned away again. So I focused on what I could control, applying for any job that came up, keeping the camper clean and organized, and holding on to the belief that this wasn't the end of my story, just a tough chapter. Living out of my camper, every day was about survival. But I kept pushing, sending out resumes to every job posting I could find. Finally, a break came, a warehouse job in a neighboring city. It wasn't close, it wasn't easy, But it was a chance, and that's all I needed. I drove my truck to the new job, heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. The work was tough, long hours on my feet, moving boxes, managing shipments, but it was work, and it was mine. I asked my new boss, a gruff but fair man named Mr. Thompson, if I could park my camper in the company lot, just as a temporary arrangement until I got on my feet. "You planning to stick around, Steve?" he asked, eyeing me thoughtfully. "Absolutely. I'm here to work," I replied, determination clear in my voice. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly, then agreed. "All right, you can plug into our power for the camper. Just make sure you're not in anyone's way." That small concession, that minimal hookup for power and water, was everything. It allowed me to live with a bit of dignity, to have lights at night and a warm place to sleep. I threw myself into the work, arriving early, staying late, and always volunteering for extra shifts. My efforts didn't go unnoticed. 6 months in, Mr. Thompson called me into his office. "Steve, I've seen your work ethic. It's impressive. How would you feel about moving up to a supervisor position?" The promotion was a lifeline. It came with a raise, a real, significant raise. Suddenly, things weren't just about surviving, they were about building something. I saved every extra dollar, cut back on everything but the essentials, and started looking for something more permanent than the back of a camper. A year later, I had enough for a down payment on a manufactured home. It wasn't a mansion, but it was real. It was mine, a 3-bedroom place in a quiet park, a community that knew nothing of my past troubles. When I got the keys, the weight of the past years seemed to lift. I stood in the empty living room of my new home, a place to call mine, a testament to every tough day I'd endured. It was more than just a structure. It was a sign that I had turned things around, that I had built a life from the ashes of rejection and hardship. Proud and a bit overwhelmed, I shared the news on social media, a post showing me with the keys in front of my new home. "From living in my truck to this, never give up," I wrote. Little did I know that post would bring my past crashing back into my life, challenging the peace I had worked so hard to create. The buzz from the social media post about my new home was still fresh when the past decided to make an unceremonious return. I was in the midst of unpacking a box of kitchen supplies when a knock rattled my front door. Expecting maybe a new neighbor, I opened it only to find Dan and his family standing there, smiles too wide, eyes scanning past me into the house. "Hey Steve, saw your post. Nice place you got here," Dan said, stepping inside without an invitation. His wife and kids followed, their expressions hungry as they looked around. "Dan, what are you doing here?" I managed my grip tightening on the box. "Well, we were thinking," Dan started, his tone too casual. "Since you've got all this space and just you living here, why don't we move in? You won't even notice us." I stared, disbelief and anger mingling. "What? No, Dan, this is my home." That's when Dan pulled out a stack of papers, waving them in front of me. "We even drew up some rental agreements. You can stay in your camper. It's what you're used to, right?" I took the papers, my heart pounding as I scanned the ridiculous terms, the signatures that weren't mine. "These are fake, Dan. I didn't sign this. You can't just move into my house." Seeing I wasn't folding, Dan's facade slipped, his voice growing harsh. "Look, Steve, don't make this difficult. We're family." That's when I made my decision. "Get out of my house, Dan, now." They didn't move, not until I pulled out my phone and dialed the police. The situation was too surreal, watching them sit in my living room as if they belonged there, while I stood the true outsider in my own home. When the officers arrived, they quickly assessed the situation. The fraudulent rental agreements, the locks that had been tampered with. It didn't take long for them to act. "Sir, you'll need to leave the premises now," one officer told Dan as they began ushering him and his family out. Dan protested, but there was no ground to stand on, not with the truth so glaringly obvious. As the door closed behind them, the quiet that settled over the house was profound. I was alone again, but this time in a space that was unequivocally mine. The locks would be changed, security added, but the message was clear. I was not the vulnerable kid they remembered. This home was my fortress, my achievement, and no one could take that from me. After the confrontation, the silence of my own home felt more like a victory than ever before. It wasn't just about having a roof over my head. It was about claiming my space and my right to a life I had built on my own terms. In the quiet aftermath, I picked up my phone and did what had unexpectedly started this latest drama. I went to social media. But this time, I shared the whole story. I posted about the uninvited arrival of Dan and his family, the fake rental agreements, and how they had tried to take over my home. I shared how I had called the police and stood up to the manipulation I had endured for years. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded in from friends, acquaintances, and even extended family members who were appalled by Dan's actions. Many shared their own stories of overcoming toxic relationships, creating a tapestry of resilience that stretched far beyond my own experiences. The backlash against my immediate family was swift and severe. Relatives who had stood by silently during my years of struggle now condemned their actions, leading to a social isolation that was both ironic and fitting. Dan and my parents found themselves pushed to the margins of family gatherings and group chats, the consequence of years of indifference and cruelty finally catching up to them. In that sea of support and shared stories, I found a sense of community that I had never experienced before. It solidified my decision to cut ties completely with Dan and the rest of my immediate family. I blocked their numbers and their social media accounts, severing the last threads of a connection that had brought nothing but pain. As I stood in my living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, I felt a profound sense of peace. My journey from the harsh rejection of my 18th birthday to this moment had been filled with challenges, but each one had taught me about my own strength and resilience. I had learned to trust in my ability to survive, to thrive, and to build a life that was not defined by the expectations or manipulations of others. Looking forward, I saw a future rich with possibility. I was free from the chains of familial expectation, free to explore what happiness meant on my own terms. There were dreams to chase, places to see, and a sense of self that was no longer tied to those who could not appreciate it. As the sun set, casting my home into a warm golden light, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, firmly in the driver's seat of my life, ready for whatever came next. With every challenge I had faced, I had built a foundation of independence and self-respect that no one could undermine. Here, in my own space, surrounded by the community I had built and the peace I had fought so hard to attain, I was truly home. As Steve's journey concludes, I want to pose a thought-provoking question to all of you. Is it always necessary to maintain family ties, regardless of the toxicity they might bring into your life? Or is it sometimes healthier to cut them off completely? This question dives deep into the complexity of family relationships and personal well-being. Please share your thoughts, experiences, or advice in the comments below. Your insights not only help build our community, but also support others who might be in similar situations. If you found Steve's story moving or if it resonated with you in any way, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and entertain. Your support helps us continue to bring these narratives to light. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to reading your comments.